For years, people have been told the same thing. Just fill your pantry. Buy shelf-stable food. Stock up while you can. And that's good advice. Until people make one critical mistake. They assume shelf-stable means permanent. It doesn't. One of the biggest surprises people experience isn't discovering they don't have enough food. It's discovering the food they saved isn't what they thought it was. A bag of flour that smells strange. Crackers that have gone stale even though the package looked fine. Cooking oil that tastes bitter. Coffee that no longer has the flavor they remember. People often think food has only two stages. Good. Or bad. Reality is much more complicated. Many foods slowly lose quality over time. Others become unsafe if they're stored incorrectly. Some stay edible much longer than expected. Others disappoint people far sooner than they imagined. That's why this list isn't about foods to avoid. It's about expectations. Because the biggest pantry mistake isn't buying the wrong food. It's expecting the right food to last forever. Let's start with one that surprises almost everyone. Flour. Most people see a bag of flour and think one thing. It'll last for years. Sometimes it can. Sometimes it won't. The difference often comes down to storage. Temperature. Humidity. Packaging. Whole wheat flour, for example, generally has a much shorter storage life than refined white flour because it contains more natural oils that can become rancid over time. Yet many people buy whichever bag is on sale, place it on a pantry shelf, and never think about it again. Months later it still looks perfectly normal. The bag isn't damaged. Nothing appears wrong. Then they bake with it. Something tastes different. The smell isn't quite right. That's when people discover that appearance doesn't always tell the whole story. Flour teaches an important lesson. The food that looks fine isn't always at its best. And that's why experienced pantry builders pay attention to storage conditions just as much as the food itself. Cool. Dry. Sealed. Protected from moisture and pests. Those details matter far more than many people realize. The second food is brown rice. This catches a lot of people by surprise. After all, rice is famous for lasting a long time. That's true. But not every type of rice behaves the same way. White rice, when stored properly, generally keeps much longer than brown rice. Brown rice contains the bran layer, which also contains oils. Those oils gradually oxidize. Given enough time, they become rancid. Many shoppers assume all rice belongs in the same category. They buy large bags without realizing one variety may have a noticeably shorter shelf life than another. That doesn't mean brown rice is a bad purchase. Far from it. It's nutritious. Popular. Versatile. The lesson is simply this. Know what you're storing. Understanding the differences between foods helps avoid unpleasant surprises later. And that's exactly what practical preparedness is about. Not buying more. Buying smarter. The third food is cooking oil. This may be one of the most misunderstood pantry items in the entire grocery store. People often focus on canned foods. Dry goods. Pasta. Beans. Then quietly place a bottle of vegetable oil or olive oil in the cupboard and assume it'll always be ready when they need it. But oils are different. Exposure to heat, light, and oxygen gradually changes them. Sometimes the process is slow. Sometimes it's surprisingly fast depending on storage conditions. The bottle can still look perfectly fine. Yet the flavor has changed. The smell has changed. People often describe it as stale, paint-like, or bitter. That's why rotating oils is so important. They're incredibly useful pantry items. But they're not something you want to forget about for years. The fourth food is crackers. Crackers feel almost indestructible. They're dry. Packaged. Lightweight. Easy to store. Surely they'll last forever. Not necessarily. One tiny amount of moisture can completely change them. Even without visible damage, crackers gradually lose what made them enjoyable in the first place. The crisp texture disappears. The fresh flavor fades. People often discover this after opening a forgotten box from the back of the cupboard. Technically, they may still be edible. Practically, they're disappointing. That's why many experienced households rotate crackers regularly instead of treating them like permanent emergency food. Because food isn't only about avoiding hunger. It's about eating food you actually want to eat. And stale crackers rarely make that list. The fifth food is granola. Granola often gets grouped together with oats. That creates confusion. Plain oats generally stored differently than granola. Why? Because many granolas contain nuts, seeds, oils, dried fruit, or sweeteners. Those ingredients affect how long the product maintains its best quality. People see oats on the label and assume they're getting the same storage performance. Not always. Every added ingredient changes the equation. That's why reading labels matters. It's also why buying foods you regularly eat matters. If granola is already part of your breakfast routine, you'll naturally rotate it before quality becomes an issue. If it's sitting untouched for years because you bought it only for emergencies, you're much more likely to be disappointed later. That's one of the biggest themes in this entire video. The best pantry isn't filled with food you hope you'll never use. It's filled with food you're already using. The sixth food is nuts. Almonds. Walnuts. Cashews. Peanuts. Mixed nuts. Almost everyone assumes they last indefinitely because they're dry. But just like brown rice and cooking oils, nuts naturally contain oils. Those oils slowly change over time. Heat speeds the process. Poor storage speeds the process. Sunlight speeds the process. That's why people often open an old container of nuts and immediately notice something feels wrong. They're softer. The aroma isn't fresh. The flavor is dull. Or slightly bitter. Again, this isn't a reason to avoid nuts. Quite the opposite. They're one of the most useful pantry foods available. Protein. Healthy fats. Convenience. No cooking required. The lesson is simply that every food deserves the right storage strategy. People often expect all dry foods to behave the same way. They don't. Some reward long-term storage. Others reward regular rotation. Knowing the difference makes all the difference. And the next 6 foods include some of the biggest surprises of all. They're foods millions of people buy every year. Foods that seem like they'll stay good almost indefinitely. Until one day they don't. If there's one lesson that keeps appearing throughout this list, it's this. People often confuse shelf-stable with indestructible. They're not the same thing. Shelf-stable simply means a food can be safely stored without refrigeration for a period of time. It doesn't mean it stays at peak quality forever. It doesn't mean every package survives poor storage. And it certainly doesn't mean you can throw it into the back of a cupboard for 10 years without ever checking it again. That's why experienced pantry builders don't just buy food. They manage food. They rotate it. Inspect it. Use it. Replace it. Because the goal isn't to own the oldest pantry. The goal is to own the most useful pantry. And the next food proves exactly why. The 7th food is peanut butter. This one surprises almost everyone. People see peanut butter sitting on a supermarket shelf month after month. It looks solid, stable, reliable. So they assume it will stay that way indefinitely. The reality is more complicated. Peanut butter contains natural oils. Those oils slowly change over time. Eventually they begin affecting flavor and aroma. Sometimes you'll notice the oil separating. That's perfectly normal for many natural peanut butters. But eventually, depending on the product and storage conditions, quality begins to decline. Heat speeds it up. Repeated temperature changes speed it up. Poor storage speeds it up. That's why peanut butter is one of those foods people should actually enjoy rather than hide away forever. It's incredibly practical. It stores well. It provides protein, calories, healthy fats. But like many pantry foods, it performs best when it's part of a regular rotation. That's the difference between collecting food and building a pantry. One gathers dust. The other feeds your household. The 8th food is powdered milk. Many people buy powdered milk because they believe it solves every long-term storage problem. To be fair, it solves many of them. It's lighter than fresh milk. Requires no refrigeration before opening. Works in baking, cooking, breakfast, coffee, tea. It's incredibly useful. But people often misunderstand what long-lasting actually means. Storage conditions matter. Humidity matters. Packaging matters. Once opened, proper sealing becomes even more important. People often remember buying powdered milk. They forget they opened it years ago. Then they're surprised when quality isn't what they expected. Again, the lesson isn't that powdered milk is a poor choice. It's an excellent pantry item. The lesson is that excellent pantry items still deserve attention. Ignoring them doesn't improve their quality. Using them regularly does. The ninth food is breakfast cereal. This catches people off guard. Cereal feels dry, crispy, protected inside a box. Surely that's enough. Unfortunately, air and moisture have other ideas. Many cereals gradually lose the thing people enjoy most. Crunch. Nobody gets excited about soft cereal, even if it's technically still edible. People open the bag, pour a bowl, take one bite, and immediately know something has changed. That's why cereal often disappoints people before it actually becomes unsafe. The experience changes first. That's something worth remembering. Food quality isn't only about safety. It's also about enjoyment. If nobody wants to eat it, it isn't doing your pantry much good. That's one reason experienced households rotate cereal frequently. It's already part of breakfast. So let breakfast naturally rotate your pantry for you. Simple. Effective. Very little waste. The 10th food is coffee. Coffee lovers understand this immediately. Fresh coffee has an aroma that's difficult to mistake. Open a new bag. The smell fills the room. Months later, a forgotten bag tells a different story. The rich aroma fades. The flavor becomes flat. Sometimes dull. Sometimes stale. Ground coffee usually changes faster than whole beans because more surface area is exposed to oxygen. That's why many coffee drinkers become surprisingly protective of how they store it. Not because coffee suddenly becomes dangerous. Because it stops being enjoyable. For millions of people, coffee isn't simply caffeine. It's routine. Comfort. The start of the day. When those qualities disappear, people notice immediately. That's why coffee belongs on this list. Not because it expires overnight. Because people consistently expect it to stay fresh longer than it actually does. The 11th food is spices. This one surprises people every time. Take a look inside your spice cupboard. How many jars have been sitting there for years? Paprika, oregano, basil, garlic powder, cinnamon, black pepper. Many households have spices older than some of the appliances in the kitchen. The funny thing is that spices often remain safe for quite a long time when stored properly. But safety isn't the issue. Strength is. Every year that passes, many dried herbs and ground spices gradually lose aroma and flavor. People don't notice because the change happens slowly. Then they buy a fresh jar. Suddenly they realize how much flavor had quietly disappeared. That's why replacing spices occasionally can completely transform cooking. Fresh spices don't just season food. They make ordinary pantry meals taste exciting again. That's a much bigger benefit than most people expect. The 12th food is baking powder. This might be the most forgotten pantry item on the entire list. People buy it for one recipe. Use a little. Close the container. Push it into the back of the cupboard. Then forget it exists. Years later they decide to bake. The ingredients look fine. The recipe is followed perfectly. Yet the bread doesn't rise. The biscuits stay flat. The pancakes feel dense. What happened? Baking powder gradually loses effectiveness over time. People often discover this only after wasting an entire recipe. That's frustrating. Especially when the solution was simply replacing one inexpensive ingredient. It's a perfect example of why pantry maintenance matters. Sometimes the smallest ingredient determines whether an entire meal succeeds. And that's something many people don't discover until it's already too late. Now we've reached the final part of the list. And the last foods might be the biggest surprises of all. Because they aren't foods people expect to have storage problems. They're foods almost everyone assumes will always be ready whenever they're needed. Until one day they discover that assumption wasn't quite right. By this point, you may have noticed something. Not one food on this list is bad. Not one is something you should avoid buying. In fact, many of them belong in almost every pantry. The real problem isn't the food. It's the expectation. People assume that once something goes into the pantry, they don't need to think about it again. Months become years. Years become even more years. Then one rainy weekend they decide to use something from the back of the shelf. That's when reality catches up. The food didn't fail overnight. It slowly changed while nobody was paying attention. And that's exactly why the final foods on this list deserve a closer look. Because they fool people more often than almost anything else in the pantry. The 13th food is pancake mix. This catches many people completely off guard. After all, it's dry. It's sealed. It sits on the shelf. What could possibly happen? Quite a lot, actually. Many pancake mixes contain more than just flour. Depending on the product, they may contain powdered fats, milk ingredients, or leavening agents. Those ingredients all age differently. The mix may still look perfectly normal. It may even smell normal. Then breakfast arrives. The pancakes don't rise properly. The flavor isn't what you remember. The texture feels different. People often assume they made a mistake. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes the mix simply isn't at its best anymore. That's why experienced pantry builders rarely buy huge quantities unless it's something they already use regularly. A rotating pantry always beats a forgotten pantry. Because breakfast should be enjoyable, not disappointing. The 14th food is dried pasta. Now this one needs a little explanation. People immediately hear this and think, wait, pasta lasts forever. Not exactly. Properly stored dried pasta generally has an excellent shelf life. But many people assume that means they can ignore how it's stored. Humidity, damaged packaging, pests, extreme heat. All of these can shorten how long pasta remains in good condition. Then there's another issue. People often forget how long a package has actually been sitting there. 5 years becomes 7. 7 becomes 10. Labels fade. Purchase dates disappear from memory. Eventually the question becomes, how old is this? And if you can't answer that question, your pantry probably needs attention. That's why labeling and rotating food is so valuable. Not because pasta suddenly becomes dangerous. Because good organization prevents unnecessary waste. The 15th food is instant mashed potatoes. These have earned a reputation for lasting a long time. And many varieties do. But people often overlook one simple fact. Packaging matters. Once moisture gets involved, quality changes quickly. People also underestimate how much flavor changes over time. Fresh instant potatoes taste noticeably different from products that have been forgotten for years. Again, they're not automatically unsafe. They're simply not what people expected. That's the pattern you've seen throughout this entire video. Disappointment usually arrives before danger. And disappointment is enough to make someone regret ignoring their pantry for too long. The 16th and final food is one almost everyone has somewhere in the house. Chocolate. Now before you say, chocolate is an emergency food, hear me out. Chocolate has a strange relationship with time. Store it well and many products remain enjoyable for quite a while. Store it poorly and things change much faster. Heat causes melting. Repeated temperature changes create bloom, that white or gray coating many people mistake for mold. The chocolate often remains safe, but the texture changes. The appearance changes. Sometimes the flavor changes too. The interesting thing about chocolate isn't just how it stores. It's why people buy it. Comfort. Morale. A familiar treat. That's why it's often one of the first things people reach for during stressful situations. Then they discover the forgotten chocolate bar in the back of the cupboard isn't nearly as enjoyable as they remembered. That's a small disappointment. But it illustrates a much bigger lesson. Even comfort foods deserve rotation. Now let's look at the complete picture. Flour. Brown rice. Cooking oil. Crackers. Granola. Nuts. Peanut butter. Powdered milk. Breakfast cereal. Coffee. Spices. Baking powder. Pancake mix. Pasta. Instant mashed potatoes. Chocolate. Notice what they all have in common. None of them became disappointing overnight. Time did the work. 1 week wasn't the problem. 1 month wasn't the problem. Even 1 year often wasn't the problem. The issue was forgetting they existed. That's the real enemy of a pantry. Not time. Forgetfulness. People spend thousands of pounds building kitchens. Hundreds of pounds filling cupboards. then almost no time maintaining what they've built. It's a little like buying a car and never changing the oil. Eventually something stops performing the way it should. The good news is that this is one of the easiest pantry problems to solve. You don't need expensive equipment. You don't need complicated storage systems. You don't need to throw everything away and start over. You simply need a routine. Use the oldest food first. Place new purchases behind older ones. Write purchase dates on containers if they're difficult to remember. Check the pantry a few times each year. Replace foods that have lost quality. Most importantly, store what you actually eat. This might be the single biggest lesson in the entire video. People often build imaginary pantries. Foods they'll eat one day. Foods they bought because someone else recommended them. Foods that looked impressive on a preparedness checklist. Then those foods sit untouched for years. A better approach is surprisingly simple. Buy foods your family already enjoys. Eat them regularly. Replace them regularly. That way your pantry is constantly refreshing itself without requiring a massive effort. There's another benefit too. You'll actually know how the food tastes. How to prepare it. How much your household uses. How quickly it disappears. That's real preparedness. Not collecting food. Understanding food. Because a pantry isn't supposed to become a museum. It's supposed to become part of everyday life. The strongest pantries aren't filled with the oldest food. They're filled with the freshest versions of foods people already eat. And that's an important distinction. Preparedness isn't about seeing how long you can leave something on a shelf. It's about making sure the food on that shelf is ready whenever you are. The next time you walk into your pantry, don't just ask yourself, "What do I have?" Ask a different question. What have I forgotten? That single question will probably improve your pantry more than buying another cart full of groceries. Because in the end, the biggest surprise isn't discovering that food doesn't last forever. The biggest surprise is realizing that a well-managed pantry almost never has that problem in the first place.